and I know we'll talk a lot about this in the offseason, but since we're starting here with the wing conversation, which one financially, of course, speaking about that, and style of play, would you say fits best with this team with what you would like to see them doing?
Oh, stylistically, I think it's pretty clear that Paul George is the better, more seamless fit. And both of them have different concerns. I mean, Jimmy's 35? I think Paul George is 34. So they're both sort of around the same area. Both of them have injury concerns. Jimmy played, I think 64 games 2 years ago, 60 games this year, has not played, and obviously then missed the first round playoffs because of what happened there against the Sixers in the play-in. There's injury concern with all of them. Paul George, you would theoretically have to give a 4-year max contract to. Reportedly, that the Clippers have made multiple contract offers to him. None of them have been at the max. In order to get it, you would probably have to give him the max to lure him away. It sounds like if the Clippers ever give him the contract he wants, he will stay in Los Angeles. It's just whether or not that contract will get there. With Jimmy, he's got 2 years left on his current deal at 49 and 52. The second one is a player option. If he turns down that player option, you can give him a 2-year contract extension. If he opts into that player option or accepts that player option, you can give him a 1-year extension. So basically, you're talking about 3 years on that Butler. Like I said, 49, 52, and then the third one would be 60. So there is one benefit to Jimmy in the fact that it would be a 3-year deal, essentially. 2 years he has left in a 1-year extension, or 1 year and a 2-year extension. With Butler, it would be a 4-year deal, so that does help a little bit, but you would also have to trade for Jimmy Butler. The concern with Jimmy is, can you keep him and Tyrese happy? And I actually have less concern with that than some do, because I think Tyrese is both capable and willing to play off ball if he needs to. I think having another ball handler in there would be good, or another creator at least in Jimmy, and Jimmy does like to create offense as well. With Jimmy, bigger concern would be keeping Jimmy happy than keeping Tyrese happy, but I think you could probably make that work, especially with how much Embiid and Jimmy both miss games. But you would prefer if Jimmy shot more than 2 threes per game. That wouldn't be the most seamless fit in that regard. But I think really, if I had to guess, and this is just a guess, like Daryl didn't say it, I would guess the priority is Paul George. And I don't want to call Jimmy a backup plan, but I think Jimmy might end up being the more likely one, because there have been some fireworks coming out of Miami. And I guess with that, I will kick it over to Kyle so he can lay the groundwork for that.
I do want to weigh in on what we're talking about here, but I would like to also bring in some of these quotes that we got coming out of, I was about to say Heat Media Day, like it's September, but that's not what we went through. So Pat Riley was asked directly if he would consider trading Jimmy Butler. Quote, end quote, no. So claims he's not trading him. But then later on, Riley said that the Heat will need to give a lot of thought if Jimmy asks for an extension. Quote, unless you have someone who's really going to be available every single night, end quote, which really is just Pat Riley either calling Jimmy a pussy, or I don't know what he's trying to do there. He then, the quote of the whole availability to me, and I'm making sure that I get this right. He was asked about, I don't know if everyone saw over the weekend, Jimmy was trolling about beating the Celtics and among some other things during the F1 race in Miami. And Riley got asked about it and said, if you're not on the court playing, you should keep your mouth shut. And while Pat Riley has more cachet than I would say any management figure in the league because of what he's accomplished, if there is one guy in the league who you don't want to be like, keep your fucking mouth shut, it's Jimmy Butler. And so I think it's going to be a very interesting couple of months leading into July. As it pertains to the question that Devon asked about the fit, I would say I mostly agree with Derek on just like trait for trait, stat for stat, whatever. Paul George is the cleaner fit. The one thing that I'm really concerned about with him, and why I see it maybe closer to 1A, 1B, is that I don't think Paul George generates leverage as a ball handler anymore. And I think a couple years ago, he still could. He's a guy who could be a consistent creator for himself, and maybe not a ton for others, but at least a little bit for others. off the bounce, like there was still a decent amount of that. Maybe you could say because he's playing next to James Harden, he just didn't need to or didn't often do that this year. But I saw what I felt were signs of athletic decline and an inability to get by people. And now, look, Jimmy Butler now is not the Jimmy Butler of 4 years ago, but I think as a closer to like a guard wing hybrid, he still has a functional handle, and he's got like the more durable post game and all the in-between stuff and the foul drawing. And my concern for Paul George would be there are long stretches of the season where it's just going to come down to, is he hitting shots or not? And he goes through, as we talked about on this show earlier this year, he can go through some just long stretches of he can't hit the broadside of a barn. There was a month and a half period of the season where he's shooting like 28% from three or something ridiculous for a shooter of his caliber. And pair that with Joel and Tyrese. And one of my concerns for Tyrese is what we saw happen in that game 6, right? Like they loaded up on him and he didn't really have a plan for how to react to it. And some of that is that he doesn't have enough dribble moves, counter moves to throw at guys yet to pick apart those defenses. The counterpoint would be if you're selling out to stop him and Joel and you're committing those extra bodies, Paul George would be a much better advantage attacker
100%.
than anybody else that they had on the team. And I think that that's completely fair. I just worry about when it's Paul George as one of the main guys in a lineup. Like it's 3 bench guys and either Joel and Paul or Paul and Tyrese. I wonder if teams can still effectively load up on Tyrese and not suffer that much for it. Whereas I feel like if you do that to Jimmy, even with the spacing concerns, even with the shooting stuff, which those are very real, legitimate things to consider, I still think Jimmy is probably in a better spot to attack teams out of those situations.
Yeah, and Jimmy was never as reliant on his athleticism as Paul was. Jimmy always had a very, strong dribble drive game. Like, and by that I don't mean that he was good at it. I mean that he pushing people off the spot, lowering his shoulders, getting in the paint, getting the line. I'm going to be terrified of both of those contracts.
Yes,
they're both probably going to end up being bad contracts for both players, what they end up getting.
See, this was the issue years ago when the Jimmy Butler discussion started back then, when they traded for him and got him in the 2018-2019 season. Yeah. That was the conversation all the way back then. Now, he proved me wrong because I just wasn't sure coming from the Thibodeau school where all the minutes played and all of that. But I'm with you that now at their ages that they are currently at, it's tough.
It's not even just predicting a client because of your age. Kyle's 100% right. Like Paul George is not the same as he was 3 years ago. If he was, that contract would be done. He would be in LA
a
Clipper
for the rest of his career.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So both of these, I'm honestly probably going to be a little wishy-washy on who I would prefer because I want to go back. Every time I watched Paul George this year, it seemed like, all right, like he's helpful, out there. But he's not, he's not the Paul George you remember. I have to go back and really dive deep because this is a massive deal. They both have high risk. But I do think Daryl Morey is going to pursue a star. Like I think everyone in the chat saying like, oh, stop pursuing old players, stop pursuing third stars, spread that money out. I don't think that's the way this is going to go if he has his chance.
We all silly like the mayor.